Thank you again for joining us at ACRP TV. Our spotlight today is on Clinical Trials Day, an exciting time here at ACRP and of course across the entire clinical trial industry. It's designated as May 20th. As one of my favorite authors, Gore Vidal, used to say, sometimes we have what we call the agreed upon facts. And this is a situation where with Clinical Trials Day, we've sort of come together and decided that May 20th is as good a day as any. It's the day that James Lind, the physician in the Royal Navy, did what is the first recorded clinical trial looking at acidic food to try to battle scurvy. So it's as good a day as any to celebrate. We could celebrate clinical trials every day, of course. But I'm lucky to have with me today Jim Kremidas. He's the executive director here at ACRP. Jim and I started at ACRP right about the same time. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael. This is going to be fun.
It's a fun day, isn't it? All right, let's talk about, of course, obviously there's a lot going on right now, and we're in a very crazy time in this world. Why does Clinical Trials Day somehow feel a little different this year?
Well, for one thing, we're all working from home with our quarantine.
Right.
I mean, I literally had to shave today, Michael, and I did it just for you for this program, just so you know.
I'll go in your performance review. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, of all times, this is probably one of the most interesting in terms of celebrating Clinical Trials Day. There's so much going on, obviously, with COVID-19. And one of the positive things about it, I think anyway, is the fact that there's a lot of exposure in the media, a lot of talk in various formats around the value of clinical research and science and how do we determine what the right thing to do is to treat a disease, in this case, an infectious disease. But, as we all know, clinical researchers are working on all types of diseases in all different kinds of ways and different phases. One of the things I've really enjoyed is watching some of the doctors, some of the researchers talk about phase 1 studies and phase 2 and phase 3 and talk about clinical development for vaccines and help people understand, this stuff takes time and it's not an easy thing to do. So celebrating clinical researchers in light of that, I think is extraordinary this year. So, obviously we're very thrilled as ACRP, the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, to be able to be supporting Clinical Trials Day and recognizing our members and all clinical researchers around the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. Clinical Trials Day falls this year, May 20th, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. Talk about how COVID-19 is impacting the clinical trial landscape, the infrastructure. It's hitting it hard.
Yeah, it is. We've seen some data from some of the CROs talking about the fact that they can't monitor sites because of their travel policies. We're hearing from sites and they're saying that patients are reluctant to come in because they're afraid they might get exposed, at the doctor's office to COVID-19. We've seen a number of sponsors stop enrollment. These are pretty significant financial detriments to sites. I mean, they typically operate on a pretty low margin to begin with. And when a study is stopped and they're not seeing patients, since it's a fee-for-service type of activity, their revenue is getting hurt. One of the surveys we did suggested that 30% of the sites were afraid they'd be out of business in the next couple of months. That would be devastating. We already have a limited capacity to conduct clinical research, and to make it any smaller would just really, really make us struggle or would have the industry struggle in bringing new therapies to market. So I worry about that quite a bit.
And ironically, COVID-19 has shown, if anything, clinical trials and clinical research is more important than we even imagined a year ago.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the other things I worry about is when these studies do start back up again, if sites had to lay off staff because they weren't working, who's going to do the work when the studies come back online? If it's not somebody that's familiar with the study, they're going to have to get somebody trained up again. And at the same time, I think there's going to be a backlog of studies that sponsors have that are waiting in the wings. They just haven't launched them yet because they know that it's bad timing. But I think there's going to be a bolus of work. It's going to be sort of the old proverbial drinking from the fire hose. I don't think that the site capacity is going to be able to handle everything all at once that's going to come forward. And I really think the ramifications are going to last for at least 6 months and maybe beyond, maybe a year or two. A friend of mine told me the other day that after 9/11, it took up to 3 years before flights were back to full capacity. I hope we don't take 3 years to get back to where we're at full capacity, but I worry about that quite a bit.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to minimize this and call this a rough patch in a euphemistic way. It's obviously an unprecedented, uh, difficult time for this industry, but it does feel like the prospects for the industry are strong going forward. Now, again, that could be
Yeah.
6 months, it could be a year. And so we're here at Clinical Trials today. Let me ask you kind of a final question, uh, or more of a statement, really, but your thoughts on the importance and the resilience of this clinical trial workforce. It's an incredible group of people.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're so proud to represent them, obviously. But one of the things I think a positive that's going to come out of this pandemic, like I said earlier, obviously, is the awareness of what clinical researchers do, and that clinical research is a great career to pursue. So hopefully, we'll expand the capacity long term. But the other thing that's really interesting is the use of remote and technology-based tools to to monitor sites, to interact with patients who are in the study. And I really think that this is going to be a catalyst that's going to help launch our industry into a more efficient and effective uh, way of doing things by utilizing some of the technology that's been out there for quite some time, but folks have just been reluctant to use it because they thought it was too risky. Well, now the risk is not using it. So I think we're going to see a lot more of the excellent tools that are out there today being utilized more frequently. We'll have a lot more hybrid trials. We'll have a lot more remote monitoring. And I think we'll be using data and technology, along with, of course, the excellent quality of the people doing the job to really, again, make it more efficient and effective going forward.
Absolutely. Well, we're celebrating Clinical Trials Day here, which is officially May 20th. We're here speaking with Jim Kremidas. He's the executive director of ACRP, and this happens to be ACRP TV, our spotlight on Clinical Trials Day. Jim, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Before I let you go, I want to remind people ACRP is doing quite a bit around Clinical Trials Day. We've got, I'm not the most hip tech guy in the world, but we even have a hashtag CTD 2020. There's a clinicaltrialsday.org website with all sorts of events and facts and a bunch of information. So ACRP is making a big deal of Clinical Trials Day. And Jim, I want to thank you for joining us today to talk about it.
Thanks, Michael.
See you back at the office one of these days.
Yeah, one of these days.